Back to One is sponsored by the HBO Max limited series Station 11, starring Amesh Patel and Mackenzie Davis, and written by Patrick Somerville. Based on the international best-selling novel by Emily St. John Mandel, Station 11 tells stories of survivors of a devastating global flu as they attempt to rebuild and reimagine the world anew, while holding on to the best of what's been lost. Vogue said Station 11 is the best new TV show of the year. It's haunting, gorgeously made, heartfelt, an end-of-the-world vision that lifts you up as much as it gives you nightmares. Station 11 is Emmy eligible. More at hbomaxfyc.com.
Something I've been doing a lot, a clarifying exercise, and I should incorporate this into my acting work actually, is thinking, what is 80-year-old James going to look back and think about this? And when I think about, if I'm lucky to live that long, 80-year-old James sitting and looking at the Polaroids from set, looking at the press, looking at the articles, looking at the pictures, thinking about the new friends I made, is going to be like, oh, fuck yes, absolutely, a golden age of my life. And again, in getting older and trying to be more like, am I happy? Am I good? Am I okay with what I said? Yes, I am.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
James Scully is an actor. He sat down with me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to talk about the work.
Do you have a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process when you get a new character? Like, is there a typical road you go down at the very beginning?
The first thing, and this is not always possible, or it is possible, but they, are sort of like, you're the professional that I hired, so I'm going to leave it to you, is hopefully having a conversation with whoever and it's hard because it ends up being different job to job, whoever the head honcho creative is, about like, is there anything like very important? Do you have any, when you're imagining this character, when you're writing this character, is there anything really important that you need me to know about them, that you need them to be, to accomplish what you're setting out to do with this script, this film, this television series? And sometimes, but again, you have to be, I think often people are caught off guard by that question.
Yeah.
And you don't, like you just said, you have to be careful about taking whatever the first thing that comes out of their mouth is as scripture.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I'm able to have those conversations, that's a great jumping off point, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything wildly important.
It's also the way, I need to jump in here because I don't know why no one has really said it like you just said it, because just getting to the point of it in that question, like they might say like, yeah, this was based on my grandfather,
right,
and he's serving this exact purpose in this story. Thank you for asking that question.
Right.
And you're like, whoa. And then that kind of like informs the whole thing you go down then.
Right, and it's
that.
not like I'm asking like, hey, would you like to use me as a plot device? But it is like, it's all, everybody's gears in a machine, and you don't want to be the gear that's spinning in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Just even like conversations about tone and, just like what comes up for them when they think about this character, to make sure that we're like in the same arena, same ballpark, mentally. And then I'll just go off and start doing my thing. I mean, I don't know. Should we just jump in with that?
Yeah.
Or would you like to?
I want to know that thing.
So to me, it's all about, nobody ever asks these questions, so I feel like I'm going to sound so pretentious. But it's a lot about like your subconscious and behavior, doing exercises that activate like unconscious biases and perspectives you didn't know you had about the character and what they mean to you, and like identifying those and being deliberate about it, and then being like, what is valuable here for me in making this character, and what do I need to unpack or get rid of? So a common thing I like to do is make a playlist. And not because that will probably inevitably will become my soundtrack while I'm working on the movie, but because in like this song, but not this song, this song, but not this song, I'm constantly asking myself the question of like, okay, well, what is it about this track that you're like, yes, that melds with this pre-existing instinctual understanding I have of this person? And what is it about this song, even if they're very like on the face, people would be like, yeah, that's like the same general genre, that's the same vibe. It's like, what is it about this song that doesn't fit with what you're trying to accomplish? Things like that. I'll do a written character history, usually just like broad strokes. With Charlie, it was a lot about how he was educated and where he was raised. Because
this is for Fire Island.
Yes. Because being Mr. Bingley, there needed to be a certain level of believable naivete and privilege in the kind of soft way of, what? That's horrible. And not in the way of like, I'm looking down my nose at you.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
yes.
But he's like a 20 whatever year old pediatrician. So it has to be balanced out by like, he hasn't truly been walking around with horse blinders on his whole life. But what were the conditions of his upbringing that put him in a place where he's so well-intentioned and also like so blind to the injustices happening in the immediacy of his life? Right? How did he end up in a house with so many awful, rich, mean people if he himself is this like little cherub? And you find the answer when you start thinking about what does this person's life look like and where are the overlaps and the not overlaps with my life, with James's life as a person. You start finding logical answers to all of those questions. So for example, and I sort of pulled some of this from my life, I went to a high school that was very focused on developing us as global citizens and sending our eyes out and away into the world about all of the beauty of like other cultures and other places and other ways of living, but also of the like horrible injustices being carried out across the globe. And I think that that's beautiful and valuable and important to cultivate global awareness in young people. But then I think that also sometimes leaves a blind spot in your own backyard or in your own front yard or at the side gate, whatever. And so that's what happened for Charlie, is that he'd spent so much time, going to charity galas with his parents for whatever the fuck far-flung organization they were raising money for. And then it never occurs to him like, oh, the queer people immediately around me might be suffering indignities and persecution that I'm not aware of. He didn't think it would be that immediately present in his life because like, I think a lot of us were raised to believe that like, now I'm getting a little tangential, but that America is a good country, and if you work hard and get an education and don't do drugs, everything will be fine for you. And I think he definitely had that kind of upbringing, buoyed even further by the fact that he was insanely wealthy. And again, so those are the kinds of things. Then it's like, so what do I add in to make this make sense? And finding those differences. And so a big difference between James and Charlie was, not that my family was destitute by any means, but that Charlie exists in an echelon of wealth way outside, your average person walking down the street.
Do you think it's important that you have to find the similarities between James and Charlie, or is it just important to identify the differences? Do you know what I mean? Or do you have to make that connection in order to play that with the proper amount of empathy you need for that character, I guess?
I think it's important to highlight both the differences and the similarities, to highlight everything, because the best thing you can be on camera is specific, and the worst thing you can be on camera is general or vague. So you just don't want to leave it up to chance. So even though, if I just sort of like wandered my way through, it might have been fine. You don't, you want to be specific about what the overlap is, because then that's there and it's ready for you, and you can utilize that to your best possible advantage. Like, I mean, the reason I got the job, one of the great similarities that I was like, okay, now how am I gonna not just sort of like unleash this on set? How am I gonna focus it and find moments to use it, is like our desire to be liked and to make the people around us feel liked and comfortable. Just like that sort of pretty like universal, but in both of us, both myself and Charlie, very on the sleeve desire for like mutual happiness and belonging. And I had, you know, again, it's like you don't want to just be like, oh yeah, that's something that we have in common, so we'll just not really think about it. Because even if it's like you have it in common, you still don't want it to be manifesting on screen or on camera or in the work that you're doing in kind of like a afterthought kind of way. You know what I mean? You want to use the best tools in your arsenal very deliberately. And then the differences, because sometimes they need to not be differences anymore, right? Like a difference between Charlie and James is that Charlie had a way more affluent upbringing than James did. And that's something that James needs to be aware of, because it will make Charlie act differently in his daily life than, like, speaking of me saying fuck at the beginning of the podcast, Charlie does not curse like a sailor, is not profane in the way that I am, is not as just like, you know, I'm very much just like, I'm going to be honest about my feelings and the way that I feel. And of course, temper that by being like, I don't want to alienate anyone or insult anyone. But Charlie is way further up his own butt about good graces and polite society and decent behavior. Which again is something he and people like him are taught is part of being a morally sound person, but in an environment like Fire Island is frequently the like breeding ground for so much of the classism and exclusionary atmosphere that happens there, because this people have this idea of like what polite, decent living is, which to bring that to a gay enclave, it's like, what are we doing? But, you know, what can you do? That's the point of the movie.
So where did you develop these tools?
I did go to acting school. I went to a performing arts high school in San Antonio called the Northeast School of the Arts, where we learned about acting, singing, and dancing. And then I actually majored in musical theater in college. I went to a tiny liberal arts university called Otterbein, where I took lots of classes in acting, singing, and dancing. The dancing and singing didn't come up as much in this project, but the acting did. And again, this is like over that 8 years of my life, these are tiny slices of what they taught me, but it's also that, and they made this clear from the beginning, you're not gonna, even in an educational environment like that, it's not like you're gonna remember every single thing somebody told you about acting for 4 years. The things that work for you, and the things that like fit with your approach as an artist, will stick naturally. They'll stand out to you. And so for me, again, the things that stood out was a lot about doing a lot of work beforehand to engage my subconscious in a way that just shifted it slightly more towards Charlie, or made it slightly more aware of what Charlie's needs, wants, and objectives were. So that then when I got on camera after doing a couple of like warm-up exercises and grounding exercises and meditating a little bit, that's the version of James that would come out. And this is what they told us when we were in school. You just cherry pick what you're like, I'll do this exercise and this exercise and this exercise. Because that's a really important thing too, is not to, it's so funny, Bowen, who is like such a fantastic actor, he's such a good actor, was so, coming from SNL where they don't have the time or luxury, he does not have the time to do a life story for every person he's playing in every sketch on that show. And I think he was a little intimidated, being like, oh, like, wow, you guys are like real actors and I don't, and it was like, no, you shouldn't be looking sideways, whatever. And again, he gives a star performance in the film. Whatever is working for you is working for you, and it's okay to trust that, and you don't need to compare it to anybody else.
That's right.
Because there, again, it's I really do think so much of it is what's already in your brain. You can only tell the story of a character filtered through your own understanding of who they are. You can't. I do exercises to help me in that, but with Bowen, especially with the character he was playing in this film, it's like sometimes you have been hired to be yourself on camera, and also you have a subconscious too. It's probably already working for you.
Right.
Maybe you don't need to go digging around there with your fingers. Maybe it's, don't put sprinkles on good ice cream. It's if you figured it out and you found a system that works for you.
And maybe one day he'll have to do something because he's approaching a character that's not like him, or it's in a way that he can't grasp.
And that's the tension
Yeah.
right now in Hollywood, is that because there's so much content, I would say like 80% of jobs young actors go out for, they will be hired because the casting director, the producer looks at them and their tape and their audition and is like, yeah, just sort of this person at rest was what I was imagining when I wrote the character. The way this person talks, the way this person moves, without putting too much.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's rare moments, like I think about someone like Jacob Elordi in Euphoria.
Yeah.
Not an American high schooler, fully Australian, I believe.
Yeah, something like that.
He, in a lot of other shows like that, they would have just hired like an all-American boy to play that role. He's one of those rare circumstances where in a very grounded human show, he's still managing to do that crazy chameleon thing of changing himself into a completely different person. Right. And then you meet him in real life and you're like, oh my God, you're not a scary psychopath. You're just this very sweet, friendly guy.
It makes you wonder like what he brought into that audition, right? Like, did he just go in as that guy, or did he change and show that he can change? Because sometimes that must be scary to
I think he must have, right? I think he must have. Well, sometimes they don't know. I have lots of times made it all the way through an audition process, and then they meet me in real life, and they're like, "Oh, this is what you're like," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, this wasn't what I was bringing into the audition room, obviously." But a lot of people, it's not that you're auditioning to play yourself, right? Because you're going to be living in circumstances and responding to things that have not happened in your real life, and that's where your job will be. But they are looking for your inherent essence, you as a person. Then there's the Daniel Day-Lewis's, the Meryl Streeps, a lot of actors, if they work long enough, will eventually get to that point in their career. Kristen Stewart just did it with Spencer, where they're like, okay, now I want to do the full fantasy. Now I want to completely transform, subvert an audience's expectations of who I am as a performer. And I think in the track that he's on, I hope one day somebody asks Bowen to do that, because he will deliver in ways that I don't think any of us could possibly imagine. Right now it's like you're playing, Howie, a sweet young Asian American gay man going to Fire Island.
Yeah, it works.
You're there. You've cracked it. Yeah. Especially in a script where Joel Kim Booster was writing it so honestly and from a place of such vulnerability, of really making it about real experiences that he's had in that place and that they've had as two young queer men of color. Yeah. And so in situations like that, it's like, and in self-tapes, and it's like, don't overcomplicate it sometimes. Yes. Like I said, if you played football in high school and you're going out for a high schooler who played football, you probably don't need to, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you don't need to go miles away from yourself to circle back and be like, oh, I probably had it in my back pocket. I'm not saying you should be lazy, but I'm just saying trust the things that you have working to your advantage. But if you're auditioning for like an alien with a bone coming out of the middle of their forehead who's like a mystic or something, sure. Go as far away from yourself as you possibly can. That said, even in that situation, there was probably something about you without makeup, without a bone coming out of your forehead, without VFX swirling around you, something about you as a person that they were like, yeah, this person gets it. Right. That's maybe the most important work you can do as an actor. If somebody hires you to do a job, trust that you can do that job. And that's why they hired you. And there was probably a pretty elaborate vetting process. So all of us on the set of Fire Island, even though we were all playing people on the color wheel of ourselves, all of us were suffering from such horrible imposter syndrome. And it was difficult to experience personally, and it was difficult to watch my co-stars go through that, because it's like, we should all have this on lock. Like, this is not the thing that's so revolutionary about this story is that it's so accessible to us, but sometimes that's really hard. Sometimes it's really hard when you're that close to the subject matter to step back enough and be like, okay, mechanically, visually, beat to beat, how am I going to tell this story? How am I not just going to be sort of like floundering in my own lived experience in front of a camera? Thank God we had Andrew.
I was just going to say, what did Andrew do? Did he notice that imposter syndrome that was contaminating everyone? And did he do something to counteract that?
He did a very good job as a director, is what he did. And he understood, because of who he is. I think I've said it time and time and time again. I think it was really important that most of the cast, if not all the cast, was queer. And I think it was very important that we had a queer director who really was closer to and had a better understanding of the experiences of Bowen and Joel than just like your average, and then maybe any other director in the world, I don't know. And that he has the same love and belief in the inherent worth of queer community. And again, talking about the filters through which you see a story with the director, that filter becomes so much more important, right? Because their perspective, taste, and unconscious biases, artistically, culturally, whatever, are going to inform what the whole movie looks like.
Yes.
And he just had the tools. He had all the tools that we needed him to have. He's sensitive, and he's sweet, and he's very gentle. And that's what worked, because we were all kind of like, there was definitely raw nerves on set, right? Because we're talking about things that are important to us and that have probably often really happened in our lives. And he just understood that, and he knew how to capture it visually in a way that, I don't know, I could never be a director in the way that he's a director. He's a genius.
But you're making me think now that, like, there is, primarily because of talking to actors, right? There is something that cannot be glossed over here, which is that something gets unlocked in an actor when they know this is a safe place.
Yeah.
I'm talking about strictly when you're dealing with emotions, right? But now you're talking about also just an entire other thing that you're not used to getting, which is a queer director, understanding situations here and that you're depicting, which is a whole other level of like, and you can't really pinpoint it, or maybe you can't even like remove it from the thing, because it's so much in the DNA of it.
Yeah.
I think.
And I don't want to be, although I have often doubled down on my belief that, like, while acting is acting, and you're not always just going to be playing yourself, and even maybe, as you mature in your career, you should aspire to play characters who are very far away from you. My conviction about casting queer actors to play queer characters, mostly because, like, so much of addressing the marginalization of any community is a redirection of funds. And it's like, guess what? If you cast a young, unknown queer actor as a queer character, you just probably gave them several tens of thousands of dollars and a platform to affect real change in the community. If you gave that to an already famous, conventionally attractive straight person, that straight person is richer now. And maybe they'll say something poignant on their press tour, but there's like a proud history now of straight actors trying to speak on behalf of the queer community. And it ranges from like tepidly effective to fully offensive. So in terms of director, straight directors have directed great queer stories before. And like, if they're willing to hunker down and really think about it, of course they can. But I do think one of the reviews talked about the like feeling the gentleness of the way the movie was looking at all of us, so that there was no clear, besides sweet Nick Adams, who carried the banner so perfectly as Cooper, there wasn't really, it's like, oh, this person is bad and this person is good. There was just like a subtlety, and so much of film is just in the way that is not the events that the director is showing to you, but the way they choose to have them visually unfold. And Andrew has been in those spaces. He's been in queer party spaces. He's lived in the uncertainty and the fear and the anxiety of those environments, and the joy and fulfillment of those environments. He knows the physical perspective of like scanning a bar and what that looks like. And so again, I think, the moral being like, it doesn't have to be a queer director, but it helps when it is. And it was certainly helpful, I think, for Joel in like realizing that script and bringing it to life. And it was helpful for the rest of us because, we like you said, safety and trust. When we would all go back to the house at the end of the day and talk to Andrew and listen to him tell stories about going out and partying in his younger days and being like, yeah, this is a person who gets it, and who is gonna do a good job, because it's not just a job to him. It's his life and Joel's life and Bowen's life and Matt's life and Tomas's life. And so in this specific story, and on this specific movie, I think it was really important that we had Andrew, and thank God we did.
Can we talk about a scene that made me cry?
Sure.
Look, I'm straight.
That's okay. Hey, I forgive you.
Thank you. I wanted that forgiveness. First of all, we have to say how amazing it is that there's almost no straight characters in this movie.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of the point of Fire Island.
Yeah, you don't see, like, these are not the sidekicks.
No.
These are not the friends.
No sassy assistants.
Sassy assistants.
No, like, somebody's gay dad.
In the middle of this movie, it hit me. I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, and then that scene that I want to talk about happened, and I'm starting to cry a little bit. And I'm like, I never cried in a gay, like, romantic scene like this. Like, this is a watershed moment, quite literally.
Now I want to guess which scene it is.
It's with you, man. It's at the end.
On the dock?
Yes.
Oh my God.
How could
Thank
you not
you for
know
saying
this?
I mean, I still haven't watched the movie because I'm so terrified of like vomiting tears into my lap in the presence of other people for a variety of reasons.
Yes. Like, you hit something there, man. You hit something there.
So I know exactly. Would you like me to tell you?
Yes.
All of that imposter syndrome, all of that pressure that all of these beautiful, exquisitely talented, just loving queer people that I had been surrounded by, because that last week and a half on the island was weird. We were there on the island. We were talking about these moments from our lives and these real vulnerabilities and insecurities that we have, and the way that they play out in these safe spaces that we try to find amongst each other all day. And then we'd wrap and it's like, should we go to a party? Like, what should we do? Armed with this like now hypersensitivity to the world around us. Yeah. And it was a hard week and a half. I think people thought that it was just like us partying 24/7, but it was a lot of us returning to the house, going into our rooms and sitting in silence. And because everyone was really afraid that they weren't going to do a good job, and they weren't trusting that they had what it took, and they wanted it to be good so badly, because for a lot of reasons, right? And queer people want to be exceptional for a lot of reasons. And I think a lot of that is like honoring the people who didn't have a chance, who came before us, like taking full advantage of this potential that we have now because of all of the sacrifice that came before. But I also think sometimes we're still operating from a place of like, I have something I need to apologize for, or I have a debt that I need to repay before I can even hit even, because I'm queer. And I watched everybody Bowen, Joel give beautiful takes and then walk off set and sort of be like, well, I have no fucking idea how that's going to turn out. Is the acting good? We were all so obsessed with it being good. And so on that moment, jumping onto the dock, and especially Bowen, who had to be willing to share very hurt, vulnerable parts of himself throughout the film.
Yeah.
Even though what I was explicitly saying to him in that moment is, you're the most interesting, you're the funniest, you are singular. What I felt like I was saying to him and the cast and every queer person I've ever met is, you don't have to be all of those things.
Yeah.
Certainly not at once.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the funniest person and the most talented person and the most accomplished person and the richest person to deserve love and space as a queer person in the world. All you owe anybody is to try to understand yourself and be honest about the person you are, and do your best to make space for the people around you to do that. And, we shot that scene very close to the end, and I just watched all of them go through so much just trying to be honest about the hurt they felt and the love that they had. And I just, by that point, was just, and Bowen and I were sort of on this track through the movie together because we were playing romantic interests, and he'd been generous and offered me into a lot of insight into how difficult it had been for him. And so there at the end, it also just came down to, I just wanted to make my friend Bowen feel good about himself. Yeah. And so I think everything in that scene was coming from it's funny. We did the first take and we were both like, ooh. And I went to him before we started rolling again, and I was like, we should try one where we're not sobbing from the get. We should try a happier sort of, I'm gonna try to find a more triumphant energy coming into the scene because I've had this big realization. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter where we started the scene. It often ended in the same place. And again, that's what happens when you put a bunch of people who uniquely understand the given circumstances in a place together and let them work. Thank you so much, oh my God, for saying that to me about that scene. I'm glad to hear that it resonated.
And this just, it says so much about your ability to, the cliche, you're using it, you're using it. But in that moment, you almost have too much to use.
Well, and that's the problem of the whole script, is it's you have so many moments in your life to pull from, so many reference points. Yeah. And you become, it's not seeing the forest for the trees. You're too close to all of it. And I think that's why they couldn't all identify that they were doing such a good job, because maybe it felt too easy. It felt too accessible. That's another thing that any young actors listening to this podcast, you will almost never feel like you did a good enough job. And that's okay. And that's part of being an artist, that queer dissatisfaction that Martha Graham talked about. She wasn't talking about queer people specifically when she said that, but there was certainly a lot of queer dissatisfaction on set at Fire Island. And that's okay. It's okay to not feel like you're doing a good job sometimes. That doesn't necessarily mean that the work's bad. But I think especially on this, we were crumbling under that pressure because the story was so important to us, and we knew that in a cultural sense it was important that it be good, because we had been given this singular opportunity, a cast of queer actors, to go to this queer place and tell this queer story. A studio, Searchlight was going to pay for that. Searchlight was going to spend, this is the one thing that happened during the filming process that I was like, that's progress. Searchlight spent millions of dollars rebuilding the Ice Palace in the middle of Brooklyn so that we could shoot the underwear party inside of it. That's maybe not the most immediate allocation of resources that could help the queer community, but they paid for it.
Yeah.
And
you're right, though. That is progress, though, right? Because
it shows a desire to talk about an experience that your average audience, straight audience member especially, might just be like, what?
Yeah.
And again, making the underwear party seem that fantastical and beautiful. Every time I see shots from those scenes, I'm like, yeah, Andrew and our director of photography just really, really got it.
I'm assuming you as a gay man grew up crying at straight romantic comedies.
That's an interesting question. Now I'm trying to think. Yeah, the end of 10 Things I Hate About You, when Julia Stiles reads that poem to the class, did always make me cry.
Now it's time for me to watch gay romance and, think about my wife.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, because that's the key, right? It's like the feelings that so many people think queer people are having that they think are some sort of like glitch or aberration or mental illness. It's like, no, we're just having the same feelings straight people have when they fall in love. It's for the most part exactly the same thing, except that it is informed and contextualized by the trauma of being a queer person in a world straight people design for themselves. That's what I think sometimes straight people still don't understand about being queer, is it's like they think it's like, oh, because you guys party too much and you use drugs and you're also promiscuous and you just leave these unsafe lifestyles. It's like, no. You straight people are the biggest variable in our lives as queer people in terms of how it's going to affect us, our interactions with straight society. And I do think, as cliched and played out as it is to say, it is as simple as just looking at a queer person and being like, they're really not that different from me, except that, I won't put it all on straight people. Society has put this space between us. But we look at the people we love and we cry and we get in arguments and I'm like in the middle of my first very long-term committed relationship. It's wonderful. I don't think, committed relationships have to be the destiny or the end-all be-all for every person on the earth, but I've learned a lot from this one. And it is just so remarkable to me. We'll have these little moments where, just last night, we were like finishing up dinner and Julio was like, so what are we gonna watch when we get home? And I was like, oh God, are we those people? We're like, the last 15 minutes of dinner is like, what are we gonna watch as we fall asleep? And it's like, because that's relationships. That's not queer relationships or straight relationships. Right. That's just like routines and balancing the Google Calendar. It's like a lot of the same stuff. And I really do think that straight people think it's like an all singing, all dancing, 24/7 cabaret. And it's like, no. Yeah. And I think Joel did a beautiful job of blending straight rom-com tropes and archetypes with a very unflinchingly authentic queer story. And then he was able to find Andrew, who, it's so funny, so many of the reviews have noted like this movie is nothing like the other movies he's made. He found a director who just understood how to live at the intersection of those two ideas. So that last scene's a perfect example. How many times have we watched straight people run through an airport or, get in a hot air balloon or whatever the conceit is at the end of the movie. And it's like, it turns out it would, if the story was about queer people, sometimes it would look pretty much exactly the same.
What if this movie becomes a big movie? Like what if you, knocking on wood there. But are you ready for this to explode, this movie?
I think something that I've thought a lot about, not to be like, here I am, the white boy to save the world, but something that I thought a lot about is like looking at my work and being like, is my whiteness and my privilege being leveraged in this project in a way that empowers more important stories to be told? And this was like a perfect example of that, where like, and for a long time, Conrad Rickamore's role was probably also going to be played by a white person, because there was supposed to be that tension. And then they saw Conrad's tape and they were like, oh, well, he's perfect, so we need to hire that guy. But I did feel like Charlie, the tension between whiteness and not whiteness exists at the heart of the story. Short answer to the very simple question you just asked. I feel like this was like a good cart to put my horse in front of or behind, wherever the supportive position is. Because it's important. Like what Joel and Bowen are going to mean to so so many young queer people, and you're already seeing it happen. My favorite response to the movie is when young queer people of color see it and say, maybe I'll go out to Fire Island. Because yeah, that's the point. It should be for all of us. And they're making that happen with this movie, I hope. If the movie blows up, I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of everybody in it. I'm so proud of how hard we all worked to make it happen. And I think that the responses so far have been effusively positive. I hope that that's a trend that continues. I hope if there are people who receive it, I don't even know what the word is. If there are people who don't like it for whatever reason, they're entitled to their subjective opinion. If they're straight, I won't really care as much, I'm being totally honest. But if there's queer people who engage with it and are like, not my experience, not my life, not the messaging I want to be put out, I hope that sparks good healing conversations. Yeah, I hope everybody sees the movie because, as evident by the conversation we just had, there is something in the movie for everyone. You could not be further removed culturally and identity-wise from the experiences of the people in that film. And yet there you were watching it and crying and being moved and having your empathy expanded for people that maybe you don't get to interact with in the natural flow of your life. And I think that that's what art is supposed, right? Isn't that what we're all trying to do? And I am proud to stand beside it. And I think something I've been doing a lot, a clarifying exercise, and I should incorporate this into my acting work actually, is thinking, what is 80-year-old James going to look back and think about this? And when I think about, if I'm lucky to live that long, 80-year-old James sitting and looking at the Polaroids from set, looking at the press, looking at the articles, looking at the pictures, thinking about the new friends I made, is going to be like, oh, fuck yes, absolutely, a golden age of my life. And again, in getting older and trying to be more am I happy? Am I good? Am I okay with what I said? Yes, I am. And so what some guy at a computer in a far-flung country wants to say on the internet is less and less relevant to my feelings about the project, So yeah, I feel ready for it. I'm also not Joel and Bowen are definitely sitting in the front of that airplane. And I think that they should be universally adored. That would be the just response. But whatever happens, I think I'm gonna just be more focused. And I have this week, we have a group chat and we're all, even though it's been really good so far, I've just been, because sometimes that's just as stressful when it's really good and you realize oh God, people are gonna talk about this and watch it and I'm gonna be asked questions and people are going to perceive me. So I've just been checking in and I think I'll be more focused on making sure that they're good, because the movie's not about me. Charlie's cute. I loved playing him. I had so much fun, but the film is not about Charlie. The film is about Noah and Howie and Will. And all of us and what we collectively mean together at the end of the film. But it is mostly about them and their relationship. And I think that they did. I'm kind of in a sweet spot right now where I'm sitting halfway back on the plane, but I'm the pilot and the co-pilot. They did such a fantastic job and they're so equipped. Just like Andrew was equipped to tell this story, I cannot think of two people more ready than Bowen and Joel to be the public face of a project like this. And they're going to change people's lives. And I get to be a medium to small part of that. So yeah, I'm thrilled. I'm just chuffed to be here,
James Scully, thank you so much.
No.
I want you to come back on the show.
Yeah, this was, do you hug? Will we hug after this? Great, we'll hug after this.
I want to hug.
You guys heard, I got consent first.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.